Hello everyone, I am HADGS Jatilaka and I am going to present our research study. The topic of our research study is investigating the variables that influence the use of social media for disaster risk communication in Sri Lanka. So first of all, let's have a brief introduction. Sri Lanka has been experiencing various types of natural and man-made hazards which have turned into disasters over the past years. A considerable amount of human lives and properties have been impacted due to these disasters. From this table, you can see the severity of the impact and the damages that occurred due to the disasters which were happened during the past 20-year period in Sri Lanka. And also, according to Global Climate Risk Index 2020, Sri Lanka is the second most affected country from extreme weather events during 2017, and it is sixth during 2018. In here, let's see about the disaster risk management. Disaster risk management involves a sum of all events, services, and actions that can be taken before, during, and after a disaster with the goal of preventing a disaster and its impact or recovering from the loss. In disaster risk management, we consider three major phases of disaster, which are before a disaster, during a disaster, and after a disaster. In the field of disaster risk management cycle has been developed, which is continuous process that goes through the every phases of disasters and illustrates the activities which are proceeded by several parties such as public government organization and reduce the damages and losses. In there, researchers have identified that the communication is a key component in this disaster risk management cycle. In the context of the communication related in disasters, several terms of communication have been introduced by the various researchers through their studies, such as disaster communication, risk communication, crisis communication, and so on. By considering all those terms of communication related to disaster risk communication has been introduced, which is basically involves the disseminating and receiving disaster risk information, which can be defined as a comprehensive information which include hazards, exposure, vulnerability, and capacity on all dimensions of disaster. Many researchers have identified that there is a connection between the disaster risk communication and the activities of each phases in disaster risk management cycle. This figure clearly describes that connection. Also, researchers have identified that the disaster risk communication can be taken place via various communication channels. These communication channels can be divided into two categories such as traditional channels and modern channels. This table simply shows the various examples for the traditional channels and for the modern channels. With the rapid development of information and communication technology, people have tended to use modern communication channels rather than traditional communication channels. In there, as an emerging and evolving communication technology, nowadays, use of social media for communication in disasters has been become a common practice among the public. Several studies have been shown that the worldwide community are using social media as a communication tool for disaster-related communication during disasters. So, it is important to identify about the general use of social media. In October 2020, 4.14 billion people across the world are using social media, and it is equivalent to 53% of the total global population. And in considering the Sri Lankan context, 6.4 million people are using social media, which is equivalent to about 30% of the total Sri Lankan population. And this figure further shows the usage of the different social media platforms and messenger applications by the Sri Lankan community. Considering the current use of social media for disaster risk communication in Sri Lanka, Disaster Risk Management Center is the leading agency for disaster risk management and disaster risk communication in Sri Lanka. And they disseminate disaster related information through their various social media applications. Apart from DMC, there are other disaster related departments and organizations such as Meteorology Department, Epidemiology Unit, NBRO, and they use their own social media applications to disseminate disaster related information and warnings to the general public. And also news media, community groups, influencers are also use their own social media applications to distribute disaster related information to the general public. So now let's see what are the reasons to use social media for disaster risk communication in Sri Lanka. So social media provides advanced facilities related to disasters such as Facebook safety, Twitter alerts, facts about COVID-19. And then social media provides multi-directional communication mechanisms such as one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many. And also in social media, several interfaces can be used to communicate information such as photographs, video clips, live videos and so on. And also social media can use without any other essential utilities such as electricity, unlike traditional media. And also we can use social media very easily, and also it provides timely information sharing. And this slide shows some newly introduced advanced facilities in social media related to disaster. From the previous studies, it has been identified that there are several variables or predictors that influence the use of social media for disaster risk communication. Hence, the objective of this study was to identify the variables that influence the use of social media for disaster risk communication, and to investigate the variation of those variables in the context of use of social media for disaster risk communication in Sri Lanka. So this is the methodology what we followed for this study. And as the first step, through the literature review, several variables have been identified. Previous studies have been identified that the sources and channels used by the general community for disaster-related communication may vary considerably according to the demographic characteristics. Hence, age, gender, and the previous experience about the disasters of community were taken as the variables for this analysis. And then, based on the literature review and the identified variables, online questionnaire was prepared. This was prepared by using SurveyMonkey, which was paid online survey software that helps to create and run professional online questionnaire. Link to the questionnaire was circulated among the community via social media applications, especially from Facebook and WhatsApp. For this questionnaire, 408 responses were collected. And the analytical study was carried out in two phases of this research study. As the first step, descriptive statistics of results of the questionnaire were obtained, and then as the second step, binary logistic regression analysis was conducted for the results. And all these analysis were done by using IBM HPSS statistics software. And as the first step of the analysis, uh, variables that we use for this study were categorized according to data types in SPSS software. So in there, use of social media was considered as a dependent variable, which is a categorical nominal variable, and gender, age, and the previous experience of disaster were considered as a independent variable. This figure clearly describes the way we categorize the variables, and this is the results of the descriptive statistics. And the results of the descriptive statistics basically describe the demographic characteristics of the respondents. So in there, at the first, 80.6% of respondents were used social media during disasters, and 57.6 of respondents were female. And this graph shows the age groups and the educational or professional status of the respondents. So, and at the second phase of the analytical study, a binary logistic regression analysis was conducted for the results of the questionnaire. In there, four major requirements that should be fulfilled in order to conduct this analysis. So in our case, all these requirements are satisfied. So this is the results of the binary logistic regression analysis. And here we can summarize the results. So previous experience is a positive and significant variable, and second, gender is a non-significant variable. In here, age has been represented by 6 dummy variables. So we can compare the dummy variables with reference category, and then we can obtain the variation of the age group category with the use of social media during disasters. As an example, respondents who belong to 18 to 24 age group category were more likely to use social media than under 18 age group category. So these are the conclusions. So several conclusions were made from this study. So previous experiences of disasters are caused to increase the use of social media during disasters in Sri Lanka, and gender is a non-significant prediction or variable, which means that there is no relationship between the use of social media during disasters and gender. And also, this study concluded that people who are belong to 18 to 24 age category are more likely to use social media during disasters than other age groups. And also, people who belong to 25 to 34 age group are also use social media during disasters in a considerable way. And also, this study concluded that with the increase in the age group from 18 to 24 to 45 to 54, the use of social media during this has been decreased, but it has been again shown an increase in the use of social media during disasters among the adult community. who are belong to 55 to 64 and 65 plus age groups in Sri Lanka. Most of the people who belong to these age groups are in Sri Lanka are retired from their jobs and stay in their homes restfully. Therefore, a considerable amount of time can spent by them to study and reveal the opportunities for using social media during disaster. So this might be the reason for increased social media usage among the adult community in Sri Lanka. And finally, this analysis concludes that the Sri Lankan community who belong to the age groups of 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 55 to 64, and 65 plus are the targeted group which should be paid more attention to enhance and develop the use of social media for disaster risk communication in Sri Lanka. Thank you.